Picture this for a moment. No summit, no declaration of war, just a tanker that never reaches its destination. Somewhere between the Caribbean and the Atlantic, oil stops moving, not because of an accident, but because the United States decides it will. Up to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil are seized, reassigned, and prepared for sale at market price. And with that single action, sovereignty quietly changes meaning. This is not a sanctions story. It's not even a Venezuela story. It's a story about what happens when one power controls the physical arteries of the global economy. Ships, routes, payments, and its rival can do nothing but protest. Here's the detail most people miss. China is watching this happen, and it isn't responding. In a moment, I'll show you the mechanism behind that silence and why it may matter more than any speech, threat, or trade deal you hear about this year. If you care about how power really works now, stay with me. To understand what you're watching unfold, you have to drop the idea that this is about punishment or diplomacy. This is about who controls outcomes. For decades, sanctions meant paperwork, warnings, restrictions that could be bypassed. That era is over. What's happening now is something far more direct. The United States is no longer arguing about who should trade. It is deciding who physically can. Oil doesn't matter because it's Venezuelan. It matters because it moves through routes, ships, ports, insurers, and markets that the U.S. dominates. And when those arteries are controlled, ownership becomes theoretical. You can claim reserves. You can sign contracts. But if your cargo can't leave port, none of it matters. This is the core shift most people haven't processed yet. Power is no longer exercised through permission. It's exercised through interdiction. And once you see that mechanism clearly, the silence of China stops being mysterious. It becomes inevitable. For a long time, energy was treated as a bargaining chip, something negotiated, something priced. But that assumption only holds when everyone depends on it equally. The moment the United States became the largest producer of oil and the largest producer of LNG, the balance shifted quietly, structurally. Energy stopped being a vulnerability. It became leverage. At the same time, Venezuela moved in the opposite direction, an economy hollowed out, an oil sector mismanaged, exports increasingly dependent on one buyer, China. That dependency looked like partnership, but structurally, it was a trap. Because when your economy survives on exports and someone else controls the routes those exports travel, sovereignty becomes conditional. This is where the system flips. Upstream ownership no longer matters if downstream logistics are blocked. And once energy abundance meets naval dominance, sanctions stop being symbolic. They become physical. That's the context most headlines miss. And it's why what comes next doesn't feel sudden, it feels inevitable. The test came quietly, not with an announcement, but with ships that never arrived. 2 sanctioned oil tankers are intercepted, not warned, not delayed, taken. And suddenly, what had been theory becomes reality. Up to 50 million barrels of oil are no longer controlled by Caracas. They are transferred, reclassified, prepared to be sold at market price under U.S. jurisdiction. This is the moment the line is crossed, because seizing oil is not a sanction, it's appropriation. It tells every actor watching that contracts no longer protect you. Flags no longer protect you. Even sovereignty no longer protects you if you can't move your cargo. Inside Venezuela, loading stops. Foreign buyers wait. Nothing moves without approval. And the message is unmistakable. This is not pressure meant to persuade. This is pressure meant to decide. The system has shifted from rules to force, from negotiation to control. And once that happens, the real question is no longer Venezuela. It's who dares to challenge it. Here's the mechanism that turns this from a crisis into a system. The United States doesn't need to occupy oil fields. It doesn't need to govern Venezuela. It only needs to control what happens after extraction. Because oil has no value until it moves, until it is insured, until it is shipped, until it is sold in markets that recognize the transaction as legitimate. That entire downstream chain runs through institutions. The U.S. dominates. So when tankers are seized, the message isn't just sent to Caracas, it's sent to insurers, to ports, to buyers, to banks. This is why 303 billion barrels of proven reserves can exist on paper and still be functionally unusable. Ownership without logistics is fiction, and this is where the system becomes asymmetric. The United States acts from abundance. It is the largest producer of oil, the largest producer of LNG. China, by contrast, depends on imports. So when Venezuelan oil stops flowing east, Beijing doesn't lose a bargaining chip. It loses supply. That imbalance is the hidden engine of everything you're seeing. And once it's activated, responses stop being rhetorical. They become constrained. This is where the second rupture appears. Because Venezuela doesn't just lose control of oil, China loses access to it. Nearly 80% of Venezuela's crude exports were flowing to Chinese buyers, and now they don't arrive. No alternative route appears, no escort fleet, no counter-seizure, just silence. And that silence is the signal, because if China could respond here, if it could protect cargo in the Caribbean or the Atlantic, it would. But it doesn't. The gap between rhetoric and reality opens wide. Russian voices threaten retaliation. Chinese statements stay verbal. And everyone watching understands the implication. Power projection has geography, and China's stops far from this theater. What looked like a strategic partnership suddenly reveals itself as dependency. Venezuela can't deliver. China can't enforce. And when a buyer cannot secure supply, contracts collapse. Debt arrangements fail. Influence evaporates. This is the moment the Sino-Venezuelan axis breaks. Not diplomatically, but physically. Because the system has reached a point where intent no longer matters. Only reach does. Now this is where it reaches you. Because when oil stops moving, prices don't freeze. They ripple. If you live in a country that imports energy, your costs rise first. Fuel, transport, food. And you don't hear the reason explained this way. You're told it's inflation, or instability, or supply issues. But underneath, it's leverage being exercised. When one power can redirect millions of barrels, someone else pays for the adjustment. Factories slow, shipping costs climb, households absorb the shock. And here's the part most people never connect. These decisions are made far from voters, but their consequences land right in your daily life. This is why understanding systems matters, not for ideology, for clarity. If you want to see how these forces shape what you pay, what you earn, and what breaks next, stay with me, because this isn't ending at one country or one shipment. Once energy leverage is exercised, it doesn't stay regional. It propagates. China loses Venezuelan supply. At the same time, its position with Iran weakens. Two major energy pillars begin to wobble together. This is where pressure compounds. A country that imports energy cannot absorb simultaneous shocks without consequence. Industry slows. Strategic reserves thin. Diplomatic flexibility collapses. And the signal to the rest of the world is unmistakable. If a major power cannot secure oil for its closest partners, what protection does it really offer smaller ones? Alliances start recalculating. Markets reprice risk. Neutral states quietly hedge. This is how dominance spreads without troops, through expectations. When energy flows are redirected, global planning changes. Investment shifts, supply chains reroute, and suddenly, countries aren't choosing sides because of ideology. They're choosing based on who can keep the lights on. That's the global effect most discussions miss. Power isn't announced, it's inferred. From here, the system narrows into three paths. The first is stabilization. China adapts quietly. It secures alternative supplies at higher cost. Growth slows, but the system holds. This is the best case scenario, and it still means permanent loss of leverage. The second path is fragmentation. Energy insecurity bleeds into trade. Rare earths, chips, payment terms, every choke point becomes contested. Supply chains shorten, trust disappears. This is a colder, more brittle world, one where efficiency is sacrificed for control. Then there's the third path, escalation. Not war in the traditional sense, but retaliation through systems, more interdictions, more export bans, more financial barriers. Each move justified as defensive. Each response narrowing options. And here's the key insight. None of these futures are chosen by speeches. They're chosen by constraints. Energy dependency, logistics control, technological access. Those who can absorb pressure shape outcomes. Those who can't react. The question now isn't what leaders say. It's which systems break first. Here's the conclusion most people resist. Power today isn't about declarations. It's about who controls the systems you can't bypass. Oil, shipping, payments, chips. The United States isn't winning arguments. It's managing constraints. China isn't losing because of ideology. It's losing because dependency compounds faster than influence. When energy moves only with approval, sovereignty becomes conditional. When technology requires upfront payment, trust has already collapsed. When trade deals aren't honored, leverage replaces negotiation. This is not the return of an old world. It's the emergence of a quieter one, where outcomes are decided before anyone speaks. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. Watch the arteries, not the announcements, because the next shock won't arrive as a crisis. It will arrive as a logistical adjustment, and by the time it's visible, the decision will already be made. If you want to understand what breaks next and who still has room to move, stay with me. This story isn't over. It's just entered its most consequential phase.